All right. Today, we're going to have a short lecture here. This is going to be our first lecture on what I'm calling the post-war period. This is really a unit that we're going to look at American culture and the American economy and a little bit of American politics in the aftermath of World War II. We're going to be looking at the years, the late 1940s, the 1950s, into the 1960s. And there's lots of cool cultural and economic discussions that we can have. For today, I specifically want to lecture on the beginning of post-war prosperity. So I'm going to click on our unit page, and the reading that we're going to be looking at in class is linked down here. It's the very first link, and it says post-war prosperity secondary source reading. So I'll probably link this in the assignment, but if you want to go back and find this later, that's where it is. And this is what we're going to be looking at in class. This secondary source, I don't have the credits on here, but this is from a historian named David Kennedy from a book called Freedom from Fear. And what he's talking about here is it starts with the war had shaken the American people loose and shaken them up. After World War II, we've just spent the past month going over what's called the Cold War. But what about life for the average American? The average American was not making foreign policy and engaging in strategic warfare over Vietnam or nuclear missiles. What was life like in America after World War II for the average American? And it says the war had shaken people loose and shaken them up. The first thing, and I really encourage you to read this, we'll be reading it in class, but the first thing that I want to point out, let me get a marker here, is this part here. It looks like it's in the second paragraph right here. The war, it says the war, the huge expenditures of weaponry had cleansed the Keynesian doctrine that government spending could underwrite prosperity and inaugurated a quarter century of the most robust economic growth in the nation's history, an era of the very grandest expectations. Don't miss what that's saying there. The 25 years after World War II is the longest and largest period of uninterrupted economic growth in American history. America will grow commercially and economically more from 1945 to 1970 than at any other point in American history. So, for example, already this year, we've talked about the boom of the Gilded Age, when industry was thriving and Rockefeller and Carnegie and the monopolies. We've talked about the boom of the 1920s. After World War I, there was economic growth right before the Great Depression. But this period after World War II is the longest, largest, uninterrupted period of economic growth in American history. America will go from something that most of us wouldn't recognize to resembling the commercial and economic America that we live in today. This is a modernizing, if you will. So that's the first thing I want you to see and kind of get your heads around. When we talk about this post-war period, it is a period of unquestioned prosperity. The second thing that I want you guys to see, I'm going to scroll up here a little bit, is that there were several statistics or factors that could be cited behind this growing prosperity. I'm going to use the spotlight here on this, but up here in the top paragraph, it mentions the millions of new jobs after World War II. It talks about how annual family income more than doubles. It talks about home ownership. 2/3 of all Americans are now owning their own homes. And here's a big one, the baby boom. After World War II, soldiers came home and they just wanted a sense of normalcy. They wanted to get on with their life. And from 1945 to 1963, we see the largest demographic change in American history, this baby boom with more than 50 million babies born in a decade and a half after the war. So all of those ideas, this increase in jobs, the increase in incomes and these growing families are going to kind of be catalysts for this quarter century of huge economic growth. One last term that I really want to highlight at the end of this, and again, I'm going to leave the spotlight, is going to talk about the GI Bill. GI stands for government issue, but what it's really referring to is the veterans that returned home from war. There was a fear after World War II that without the war as a source or an engine for the economy, that we could return back to a Great Depression. And so the government took it upon themselves to make sure that when soldiers and when people were returning back to a normal economy, that there would be opportunities. And the GI Bill is sometimes called the GI Bill of Rights, but it really advocated for and allowed veterans to go to college, go to a trade school and learn a skill, get a low interest home loan so that they could buy that first house and really start that family. It says here the GI Bill had sent him to college and he was on his way up. There was an aspect after World War II where the government was really spurring or sponsoring this growth in prosperity. We'll learn about this in our reading, but presidents like Truman sponsored a proposal of packages called the Fair Deal. And after that, Eisenhower continues with many of those ideas. And when we get to the 60s, John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson are going to have proposals called the New Frontier and the Great Society. And this kind of government sponsorship or this government underwriting of prosperity and growth leads to a new experience, for a redefinition maybe of the American dream. Look at what this new home looks like. It says back in the day, during the Great Depression, their parents talked about the days of outhouses and kerosene lanterns, but their place was plumbed and wired and fitted with every kind of modern appliance: telephone, radio, refrigerator, washing machine, and the newest gadget of all, television. This is all giving an indication of what a new America, what a post-war America could look like. The rest of this document gets at some of the discussion ideas. In class, we're going to talk more about consumerism, some of those quotes from the discussion board. We'll go through some of these kind of introspective, what is happiness, what is essential, what role do material goods play in our lives. We will also kind of go through these key terms, and I've gone through a couple of them, GI Bill and baby boom, but we'll look at some of these others as well. So make sure you're doing your reading. I think we're in module 13 now, and you can use this secondary source and these questions to get you thinking in the right direction. That's it for post-war prosperity. Thanks for watching.